Hello and welcome to episode 88 of the Wisdom from the Akasha podcast. My name is Suzie, I am your host, and I am an Akashic Records teacher and practitioner. Before I get into the subject of today's episode, I do want to remind you all that if you want to become a trained Akashic Records reader before the end of 2025, then I am going to be hosting my next level 2 class in October. We start on October the 23rd, and that will have you through the entire level 2 class before Christmas. We get everything finished up before the Christmas break. So if you do want to come along to that class, as usual, I'll pop the link into the show notes. And if you have any questions about the training whatsoever, always feel free to reach out to me via the website. It is essential for level 2 that you have done level 1 so that you understand how to work in your own Akashic Records, whether that's level 1 with me or with another teacher. But level 1 is essential before moving to level 2. I will also pop a link into the show notes about the level 2 class, so if you are interested, you can go and listen to that episode. There I go into more detail about what the class entails, how it works, the types of things that we cover. But if you are feeling that calling to becoming an Akashic Records practitioner, I would love to see you all there in October. Today I'm going to be answering a listener's question, and today's listener's question is, have the Akashic Records been hijacked? Before I get into that, I do want to remind you all that you are invited to ask me any questions or just leave me any topics that you would like me to cover here on the podcast. I will, of course, put a link into the show notes for you to be able to do that, but I love receiving listeners' questions. So today's question, have the Akashic Records been hijacked? This is a statement that gets made that the Akashic Records have been hijacked every couple of years, I'd say, within the spiritual community. I've been around the spiritual community for a long time, and this question is something that comes up every couple of years. There seems to be similar themes and similar statements every couple of years, which makes sense. We're cyclical beings and we live in cycles. So not the first time I've heard this question, not the first time I've answered this question, but I do want to go into quite a bit of detail around this today. The two questions that usually come up around the same time are, have the Akashic Records been hijacked and are the Akashic Records dangerous? The answer is going to be similar for both, and I will pop a link into the show notes as well of a blog post that I wrote a few years ago around the question of, are the Akashic Records dangerous? So the short answer for those of you who want to skip this episode and go on with your day, no, the Akashic Records have not been hijacked. Okay? I think I understand where this misconception comes from, which I'll go into in detail, but short answer is no, they have not been hijacked. Before I get into the deeper conversation around this, I want to use this opportunity as a reminder that we have to be very conscious of the people that we're listening to, the content that we're consuming online. Anybody who is promoting a fear or division narrative and also promoting themselves as being a spiritual teacher or a guru or whatever should automatically raise a few concerns in your internal technology. Okay, because fear and division are the absolute opposite of oneness. Now, what I want you to understand is there are topics that we have to talk about in the spiritual community that can be quite difficult. My students will attest to the fact that I'm forever saying that the spiritual journey, it's not all love and light and rainbows and unicorns and candy floss. You know, it can be hard. There are difficult things that we need to discuss. But if the intention behind what someone is asserting is fear or division, start to question it. No matter what they say they are, who they say they are, it's going to stir something up in you that you need to look at. It's something that we should be questioning when we're on a spiritual journey, which of course, when we look at things like unconditional love, unity, oneness, those higher spiritual principles, we know that fear and division go against those. So let's get into what the Akashic Records are. Let's remind ourselves about what the Akashic Records are as a totality. So the Akashic Records are a record, so an energetic record of source consciousness. Okay? You'll see this referred to as the Akashic Records being a record of the mind of God. Your Akashic Records are your portion of that bigger record, the Akashic Records. So your Akashic Records are your soul's journey since it left Source and throughout its little adventure that it's been on. But the Akashic Records are the energetic memory of Source consciousness itself. There is nothing greater than or more powerful than Source consciousness or God itself, herself, himself, however you want to define the greatest power that there is. If there was, Source consciousness would not be Source consciousness. Okay? That other thing that was greater than it would be the creator of all. So my question is, how do we then come to a conclusion that the energetic memory of Source consciousness can be hijacked by something else? This is where the kind of question is a non-starter. Of course, this energetic record of Source consciousness is extremely well protected. There's a whole host of beings that look after this that are more powerful than you could ever imagine here in our limited perspective from Earth. So no, it hasn't happened. Okay, the Akashic Records have not been hijacked. Now, where do I think this narrative comes from? Something I talk about a lot in my training is there being many fake versions of the Akashic Records in the astral realm. And I talk about this because it's an important topic. Sometimes students will come to me, they will have done a guided meditations on YouTube or something, and there's nothing wrong with guided meditations on YouTube, but it's usually how it happens. And they go to what they think are the Akashic Records, and actually the guides there are rude to them, or they get turned away, they get told they're not ready, whatever it is. And this is not how the Akashic Records guides operate. Okay? Now, there are many fake versions of the Akashic Records and everything else in the astral plane. Okay, and if you're trying to access the Akashic Records via meditation and you don't know the difference between the astral and the spiritual planes, you don't know how to go through the astral into the higher spiritual planes, then the likelihood is you're going to go into the astral plane and you're going to come across one of these fake versions of the Akashic Records. This happens. I have people reach out to me all the time with this experience, and then they come to class, they learn how to go into the Akashic Records, and it's a completely different experience. The Akashic Records guides have nothing but unconditional love for you. They will help you, they will support you, they will guide you. There's never going to be any rudeness, no, you're not good enough, or anything like that. Okay? There does seem to be a lack of conversations or education or understanding around the astral plane within the spiritual community as a whole. And I think that's partly because, as I said earlier, there are sometimes things that we need to discuss from the spiritual perspective that aren't particularly pretty or nice to talk about. I will link an episode in the show notes where I did an introduction to the astral plane. If you want to do a deeper dive into your education around this, highly recommend the membership. I did a 5-part series in the membership last summer, which was 5 parts just on the astral realm. So that's 5 90-minute sessions on the astral realm, because it is a huge topic and it is something that we need to educate ourselves on and understand, so that if we're going into the astral plane via meditation, via plant medicine, via whatever spiritual practice it is that we're doing, that we know what it is that we're dealing with. Okay? Because the whole point of the astral plane is to train your discernment. It's to work with that internal technology to come across different beings, different entities, all of these different things, and for you to sit with the question, is this aligned to my soul? Is this part of the evolutionary stream? Is this being entity presenting itself to help me and my soul evolve and grow and expand? Or is it not? That's the point of the astral plane. Most people on their spiritual journey are going through this level of initiation, which is this training of the discernment, training of the resonance. And this is why the astral plane is so important. And this is why so many people are having these astral plane experiences. But in respect of why this is important today is I think what's happening is I think when people are saying, oh, it's been hijacked, is they have an understanding of what the Akashic Records are, as in it's going to be this place that you go to, you're going to feel all of this unconditional love, you're going to meet some guides, you're going to get this guidance, it's going to be a beautiful experience. And it is. It truly is. And then what's happened is I think people have tried to go there. And when they've gone there, they've had a not very nice or a difficult experience. So therefore, they are jumping to the conclusion that the Akashic Records have been hijacked. That's the only kind of logical explanation that I can come up with. If this is a narrative that you've heard of and you understand the reasoning behind it, feel free to share it with me. But this is the only thing that I could think of that would happen, is that somebody's had an experience with one of these fake versions of the Akashic Records, and therefore they've jumped to the conclusion that it's been hijacked. But as I said earlier, it can't be. This is the energetic memory of source consciousness itself. When people are on this astral level of initiation, so when people are experiencing things in the astral realm, there tends to be a point that people will reach. And it tends to be a point where they realize they've been tricked, because the astral realm is full of tricksters, okay? That their discernment was maybe not where it should be to be able to feel into whether or not it resonated. And they completely shut themselves down, declare everything to do with the spiritual world, spiritual development, as dark or false, or they just dismiss the whole thing out of hand and shut themselves off completely. Now, one thing I want to say here is, if this is you, if you've experienced this, is it actually completely normal, and it's a normal part of your own soul's development and your evolution to come across things like trickster energies, to come across entities that you're not quite sure, are they evolutionary, are they devolutionary? This is part of the lesson. And now what happens, of course, is when you realize this, and you realize perhaps you've been communicating with an entity and it's pretended to be something that it's not, the ego gets hurt. Okay? So this is often the point where you'll see people denounce everything, and a lot of the time running to dogmatic religion. The other thing that can happen, of course, is they come across something that's not particularly very nice in the lower astral plane. It scares them, it puts them into that energetic vibration of fear, and then they just denounce everything, shut everything down, and try to go about their daily life. But we have to remember that the whole point of that astral realm is this discernment and resonance. There is nothing to fear. That doesn't mean that the astral realm is, as a totality, pleasant. Okay, there are some beautiful parts of the astral realm, and there are some not very nice parts as well. The astral plane, the astral realm, there's actually multiple different levels that exist. Okay, and I don't want to get into that today because I'll get sidetracked, but it's not all one place. It's not that every time we go to sleep, we're all going to the same frequency or the same place. But there is nothing to fear. Okay, so that's the long answer to the question. No, I don't think the Akashic Records have been hijacked. I have no evidence of that. I have been working with the Akashic Records for many years. It's still very loving, very supportive, very much full of guidance. And certainly my current students who are going through their first experiences with the Akashic Records are finding the same. So no, they haven't been hijacked. I think this is where the question comes from. If I'm wrong, please do let me know. But please don't worry. There are many ways of learning how to work with the Akashic Records. I do recommend that if you don't know where you're going meditation-wise, it's definitely better to use a prayer method. That prayer method is designed to take you straight into those higher spiritual realms where the Akashic Records are. So I hope the listener who has asked this question has found this answer helpful. I hope you've all learned something today, and I shall see you next week for the next episode.